Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today's May 11, 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank James Joyce for getting me together with Derek Hunter, today's guest. Where in the heck are you calling in from, Derek?
I'm basically your neighbor. Well, maybe 10 miles away, 10 miles east of you, near downtown Los Angeles, in an area called Pico Union. I've been here for about 21 years.
How cool is that? The first question really is, what's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being um, is to be a human being, which means to, for me anyway, is to put the human experience above all else, which would be to put the human experience above the religious experience, above the spiritual experience, above the political experience, above basically anything else that would cause the human experience to be submissive to that other thing.
Really good. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Literature.
Did you grow up a reader because one, your parents told you to, two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
Mostly on my own, but they supported me. They were very supportive. They had their issues, but they were the one good thing. I would say they did a number of good things too, for sure. But one of them was that they were very, very supportive. All three of them, my mother, biological father, and my stepfather growing up, were all supportive of me in pursuing that.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think because we're curious, and we're also not only curious, but really mystified about what the hell we're experiencing.
Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Um, I think in that specific area of our experience, it's more innate. But I'm definitely a big proponent that environment shapes us. But I think that one right there, I think, is innately in us more so.
Thanks, Derek. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think
Until I process it.
Great verb. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can humans think without language?
No.
Chomsky says language is not just, well, I laugh because most people say yes. I love it when people go against the grain of what everybody else says, because it's like
Okay, good.
I can go through these and go 80% of people say this. My wife says, don't tell people that 80% say that, but it's true. 80% say yes. Even 90% say yes, we can think without language.
But don't say
Really?
that. Okay, so Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Derek, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I think one of the great things about our human relationships being in person is then you can really know what people are trying to express through body language,
Yeah.
through other just reactions. If you catch a reaction from somebody, then you can kind of get a sense of what they're feeling and what they're thinking. So when we're not around the person, it makes it, I think, much more difficult. So when language does break down, and if we're not actually in front of the person, then it makes it extremely difficult. And that's why I think that there's a lot of problems and people communicating online is that we're not seeing the other person, so we really don't know if they're where they're coming from, and
But
that's
but,
why
it, but isn't it funny you said that? We've never met in person. I feel like you're a chum, like we've hung out not that many times reading Finnegan's Wake, and I've gotten to know you. But to me, you could have if there was no COVID, you could have found our wake group and come to the library and meet with us in person. But what I found was, and people hate to hear this, people are more present in our Zooms than they are if they were sitting around at the library, because you're only seeing the face, your eyes not wandering, looking at the corner of the room or out the window. At the Marina Del Rey Library, we'd look out at the water. And I mean, what a way to study Joyce. That was going to be his next book after The Wake, about the water. So I think it's funny you said that, because you know it does both. Online can unite us in a more human way, and it can alienate humanness.
Well, no, definitely. I think that having the Zoom makes a huge difference. So I think that you know, we can see each other. We're looking at each
Yeah,
other's face, and you're right. And it's just like this little
yeah,
box right
yeah,
here, and so you can really narrow your focus on the other person. So I do feel like the Zoom aspect of the FaceTime aspect is great.
yeah,
And don't get me wrong too. I have a lot of good social interactions with people around the
yeah.
world, and my writing has really only been able to find any kind of audience because of the online presence of just connecting with people online. So I
Exactly.
mean, I really I'd have like I wouldn't be able to connect with people in the same way without the online experience.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's absolutely. I think it's a beautiful thing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's basically television telephone. That's what we're on, which was first shown in America in the same year Finnegan's Wake came out at the New York World's Fair.
Oh, really
19,
interesting.
1939 started Zoom. That's
Okay.
when but it really became a reality to most people when they saw it in 2001 and 68, when the guy calls his daughter from the spaceship and wished her a happy birthday. So
Right.
anyway, Derek, you anticipated this. You just said these two words. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Um, I think that we are generally in terms of what we're experiencing, we're more feeling, but we don't notice it. I think we notice our thoughts a lot more. So I think, but we're actually experiencing emotions. Our emotional responses, I think, are happening on a constant basis. We just don't notice them. It's sort of like with our five senses, our eyes, we see with vision is what we notice probably the most, and we rarely ever pay attention to the sense of smell, and we
Yeah.
don't really. It's not very. We don't really have a great sense of smell. I don't think in terms of our being in touch with our emotions. It's just because it's a lot more. Thoughts are a bit more uh, easy to identify. The feelings are a bit more murkier, but I do feel like they're actually happening more often.
Yeah. No, I'm going to shoot this question in out of order because I don't always ask it, because you brought up the word experience in regards to feeling. This is McLuhan. Everybody experiences far more than they understand. Yet it is experience rather than understanding that influences behavior. Now, I'm going to tell you what I think it means. It doesn't mean I'm right. If the kid comes in from the cold, the parent can go, "Don't touch the stove, it will burn your hand." That's experience. The parent could go, "Hey, I'm going to teach you the dynamics of heat. Put your hands really close to the stove, rub them together, and you get your hands warm." That's understanding. So I think Marshall's sort of saying, hey, we should have understanding shaping our behavior, but really experience shapes our behavior more. Now I can read the quote again if you want, or just go, you can go for it.
Well, yeah, I agree with them. I think that's true. I think that does shape what we do, um, for good or for bad. I think that sometimes, I think in terms of like understanding can be like if it's like a well developed, an open minded kind of understanding of knowledge and information in looking at things. that is open to evolving and to changing, that's a really healthy form of understanding. But when it becomes more of a dogmatic form of understanding, of providing information about experience, that can get in the way of people learning, right? So uh, I think that real true understanding is open to being wrong, and to like and looking at more of the evidence, and I think that by doing that you're more open to actual experience. So I don't think that I agree with him. I don't think that they necessarily have to be at odds.
Yeah.
Uh, but I find that a lot of times in religion or other belief systems, they choose to have a certain kind of understanding, and then it gets in the way of experience. So it interrupts their ability to look at the evidence.
It's really good. Yeah, he was really more a percept guy than a concept guy. But the greatest line ever was he teased people to believe his percepts were concepts. So he's in academia and he's supposed to be saying concepts like that's a concept. And indeed, what you did was you interpreted what he said as a percept, that it's both. It's not one of them. That's why I usually go, is it more this or more that on these early questions? And this woman said, the word more doesn't function in your question. Okay, here's two from Alan Turing in the 50s. One is thinking a function of the soul.
Well, I'm an agnostic, so what I for my form of agnosticism is that I am open to either possibility, that the what we're experiencing is completely material and completely explained by materialism, and that there is no spiritual reality, which includes not having a soul and no God and nothing else. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with just that explanation of what's going on. But I'm also okay with the opposite, that we do have souls, and that we do have um, some kind of spiritual experience after we die, or even while we're living right now. It's a spiritual experience. So I'm really open to either possibility. I think that it's okay for me. It's okay to live life with either possibility being true. And so in terms of that. Um, I was watching your interview with Leticia Barbier, and I liked her response to that question. And in terms of like where she acknowledged that a lot of the really brilliant scientists are able to express the soul, right? The soul of humanity, because they have this insight into the operations, the mechanics of what's going on. And but I really do feel like everyone has the ability to tap into that. Um, and I think it would be okay if it wasn't like that process wasn't necessarily like a soul, but it was just like a really deep insight.
Yeah,
That you know,
it's good. That's Pascal, the philosopher, mathematician, said, in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between. So you're like a comprehensivist. You're like, hey, I'll entertain both ends, but you might have a little more leaning. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
um, I know that it seems as if they do, but again, they're still like as advanced as they are now, AI and all that stuff. They're still operating on things that human beings have created, operations, and so um, it's still, you know, I mean, unless we're thinking in the same way, unless we're being programmed and we're having some higher level of intelligence that's programmed us, and that's where our thoughts are coming from, which is a possibility too. Certainly, a lot of times thoughts seem to come out of nowhere, and so it's almost as if it's possible that we're programmed, and that we're some form of AI in another dimension. Um, but I mean, in terms of so far what we've seen what machines have done, I don't think so. Like in terms of how we can think,
Yeah.
in terms of yeah, I don't think that they're there yet. But you never know. In the next 50 years, that could completely change.
Yeah, Frank Zappa said it well. He said, "Who are the brain police?" He didn't say the brain police are this or they're that. He just asked the question, you know. So, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Um, Happiness is definitely very important for me. Like my pursuit of my creative endeavors, all these projects that I've done over the years that I'm currently in the midst of, is a is there's no doubt about it that there is like a pleasure principle for me. I'm a big fan of pleasure as a part of life, and what that was when I got into recovery almost 11 years ago and quit hard drugs and alcohol and other things. One of the things I chose to do was that it was, even though I was abstaining from these things, I would not be abstaining from happiness and from pleasure altogether. And that was a very crucial thing for me, was being able to find a lot of joy in life and just doing as many fun and enjoyable things that I could possibly do, being stimulated, and having stimulation on a lot of different levels. So I think that happiness is enormously important, but um, as important as happiness is, as important as pleasure is, I really do feel like the pursuit for meaning is more important. I don't know. I'm not one to come to like a conclusion about things. I'm more interested in like trying to find the truth behind things, the meaning behind things. Um, I just, and once we get to a certain understanding of something, then it's just another step to the next path.
It's good because Viktor Frankl is where I got the question in his book Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning tends to last. What do you think of that?
Um, yeah, that's true. I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's true. Although, mm, like I would say with art, I think there's a good argument made for art that it's more based on pleasure, because a lot of times like really great works of art, the meaning can be really elusive. Whether we go back to the ancient Greeks and look at the plays by Sophocles or Aristophanes or any of their works, and really trying to like get at like, well, what's the meaning of Oedipus Rex? And there's a lot of artistic and psychological and thematic value to the work, but in terms of the meaning, it's a bit elusive. And Shakespeare's works are enormously elusive, but also enormously profound too. So I don't know. I mean, I think if meaning were to have more lasting value, I think it would have to be open to having a degree of ambiguity and elusiveness. Like the things that to me are too specific in meaning, too easy to define in meaning, tend to it doesn't leave a lot of room for investigation, and it just it may last a long time for some people, but it just sort of stays the same.
Yeah. Duh, you just summarized the wake.
Right.
I'm ambiguous about ambiguity. So
I'm on the
does the
fence about sitting on the fence, right?
does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Hmm. I'm half and half on that one. I'm
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, I definitely feel like the brain has some element to it, but I think there is something that maybe the brain is just picking up on something. Yeah.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Hmm. Speed of thought. I'll take a
There,
wild guess.
yeah, there's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right.
Oh, okay. Ding, ding, ding.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Her colleague Yvonne Rayner said, "No, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
A new tool. Hmm. Um, a new tool, I would say a really good new something, whatever it be, like a new style of filmmaking for movies, or a new way of
Yeah,
writing poetry, or a new way of painting, is
yeah,
always built on what came before. Like, it may be a
yeah,
rebellion against what came before, but I mean, even if it's something reacting to what came before and it hates what came before,
yeah,
it's still built on what came before. So I think what a new tool, I think, would be really important. I think the real, like, where the future is going to lie is that we're going to develop ability to actually start to develop our ability to read each other's thoughts. I
yeah.
really feel like that
Mind
human,
reading. Yeah,
yeah, I think we're just on the very, very edge of the precipice of that. If we live long enough, I think we're going to get to the point where we're actually going to be able to communicate without actually speaking.
yeah. That's good. Without speaking. Yeah. Yeah, that's ESP. That's intuition without speaking. That's really good. In a lot of ways. I mean, it does exist. In what new toy do you suggest, or what toy do you gravitate towards?
A toy. Oh, hmm. So it's a new toy that exists now, or something like,
No, it's the same question. See, when I ask new tool,
mhm.
people have various reactions. Then someone said, "Well, what about a toy?" So then I just added, "Well, then I'll ask what a toy, a toy." So it's not so much a new toy, it's just what's a toy that you suggest? It can be new or old or, you know.
What I would like to see is like a new art form where
Yeah,
it blends so many of the ones that have, so like cinema in a way is did that. Like, cinema
yeah,
took things from the past. It took
yeah,
music, it took photography, it took theater, it
yeah,
took literature, and kind of blended it all together, even architecture in a way. So, it blended all these things together. So I would like to see a new toy or a new tool where it actually blends everything all at once together
yeah.
somehow. I'm not really sure all the specifics, but that would be a really great thing.
No, that's good. I like that because cinema's only 130 years. I never go to Hollywood. I was driving down Hollywood Boulevard the other day. There was a billboard that was better than a cinema screen. Did you see this billboard? I mean, it was unbelievable.
Where
It
is it?
was just, I don't know, I guess it was on Hollywood Boulevard, and there's no text in it. It was motion picture going and a billboard, and I was like, holy moly! And then we went in and saw the new Frank Zappa film on the Dolby Atmos screen, and it was still really good, even though it was shot 50 years ago. But it was nothing like this billboard, and it will never race out of my brain. Well, what in the heck is that billboard doing? So I mean,
Right.
to me was almost doing what you were saying, because I've studied what you're talking about for years. It's called live cinema. That's what Coppola's obsessed with. Like, how do you change it? And it was invented years ago. It was like, when cinema was starting 100 years ago, that people would stand next to the screen and talk. So you have that's all you get at Red Cat, and dancers, artists, avant-garde, you know, pushing the limits. They just use a screen in the background and act in front of them. You can't go to rock shows or anything anymore without a video projector in the background.
Right.
So I think that's what when you brought in cinema, that's what you're sort of edging in. How do you make this, 3D experience,
Right. Blending,
whatever.
like, literature, like words, like the
Yeah,
power of words, right? And
yeah,
then, like, you're hearing music, and then, like,
yeah,
people are in front of you, and
yeah,
uh,
everything. Yeah,
sculpture and dance, and just
yeah.
I,
It's
I
like
I don't know
what
how. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, Derek, it's called living.
Right. Oh yeah, there's that thing.
We don't need all that crap.
Right. I
That's
forgot
all
about that.
stupid.
Yeah.
It's called
Yeah.
Zooms. No. Okay.
Right.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Um, as much as I do kind of like experience like anxiety, and I don't really experience it right before going to sleep. So I would say just like in terms of like an actual real specific experience of right before I go to sleep. I go to sleep, I'm actually kind of looking forward to just like lay my head down and rest. But what I guess what I am worried about is just the precarious situation that human beings are on this planet. And I'm a big believer that climate change exists and it's real. And I'll be honest, it frightens me that we have people in positions of power who are in absolute denial of it.
Yeah.
So my fear, I think, is just that where is this world headed? And
Yeah.
just like how the earth is going to be around without us. Even if
Yeah.
if we perish, then it's still
Yeah.
going to be around. So, and even if say a few handful of 5 to 2%, 5% survive, and then the rest of us all perish, I think
Yeah.
that also. So if human beings still survive, but then just so many people perish, I that's a very deep fear that I have, and it does.
Yeah.
Uh, it's like it's just a horrible tragedy if that were to happen, and
Yeah. It's
that's
like,
definitely
dude,
that's what I fear before I
yeah.
go to sleep at
Well,
night.
we live in LA, man. If they didn't do something about air pollution, car pollution, it would be a lot worse. They
Oh
did something.
yeah,
Silent Spring by Rachel Carson changed the world. 1962. Hey, there's a thing called respect for Mother Nature. Let's turn it on. you
right.
know, it's
I
like
remember.
turn
Yeah, I
on
remember.
awareness level.
I absolutely remember like the early '80s. I lived in the early '80s here in LA. The air was horrible.
Yeah.
In the mid '80s, it was horrific. And then when I came back to LA in the '90s, it was like a lot better because of all the regulations that took
Yeah.
place. And I think those things that have real impact.
Real impact. So McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound the poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Derek, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think because well, one of the advantages I have having gone through the struggles of addiction myself personally, and then worked as a counselor in that field, is the power of denial.
Yeah,
And so there is a really strong need on human beings' part, where if you want something like if there's something that you want, and irregardless of the consequences, that's the definition of addiction. So we have people in positions of power who are enormously addicted to wealth and to greed, and greed is really is sadly has been uh, not diagnosed with the right people, and so it's an addiction unto itself. I mean, there's really no other explanation for it, and so I think that if in terms of it's the traumas that people aren't really willing to face about what we've gone through in terms on a global scale, on a national scale, on a community scale. There's so much trauma that we human beings have inflicted on each other on an individual scale. So the artist is tapping into that experience, tapping into his or her own experience, and transmitting it to the world. And and there may be some appreciation, and certain artists will get more appreciation than others. But ultimately, there's the denial factor that they're just
yeah,
not willing to see the reality of the experience, probably because it's just too painful, and
yeah,
we're too busy, preoccupied with running around trying to gain some kind of material success or some stability too, just being
yeah.
able to get by.
Really comprehensive and articulate, Derek. I appreciate that. So, do artists have moral obligation?
No, I don't think that there is an obligation. I think that a lot of times some of the greatest works of art have been not really like distinctly moral. I think that they've come at the human experience in a way where it will see the complexity of the situation that the characters are going through, or the narrative, or whatever it may be, and then show you truths that way. I think that's what makes Shakespeare so great, is its lack of, it's not didactic, it's not forcing a message down your throat. So I think that the complexity of human experience is really super important, and that should be more important than having a moral obligation. I think I think Oscar Wilde. I forget the exact quote, but he had a really witty, funny thing, as he always did for everything, about that kind of situation of whether art should be uh, moral or not.
Yeah.
And I believe it was in the introduction to the picture of Dorian Gray, and so of course, which is very ironic, because the picture of Dorian Gray is actually in the end quite a very moralistic novel. So I think that's one of the beauties of a great writer, great thinker like Wilde, is his ability to have more than one meaning behind something. Because
That's
he was enormously immoral individual, but he didn't go
yeah.
about it as say directly as say his peer. I do like George Bernard Shaw, but George Bernard Shaw was a bit more didactic in his approach to art, and that there's a place for that. I love Bertolt Brecht. I love didactic art for sure, and it absolutely needs to be a place for it. But there shouldn't be an obligation that an artist has to be moral.
Yeah. It's really good. I appreciate what you just said, because that's what I learned from studying Frank Zappa is embrace contradiction.
Mhm.
And really, really good what you said. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I think currently, right now, and this going back to Frank Zappa, and he is really a brilliant example of someone who's able to be moral and also artistically, aesthetically uh, exploratory, right? I think
Yeah,
an artist can be both. Like, you don't have to be
yeah,
one or the other. And in his private life or his public life, he was very outspoken about politics, which was great. And it's great to see so many of his debates with people online these days. Because he was such a brilliant individual. And one of the things that he predicted in the 1980s, what he was really concerned with, was this country becoming a theocracy. And he
yeah,
thought that was one of the big dangers of our country, was that in the 80s, that was when you started to see this rise of Christian nationalism with Ronald Reagan and all those people. So I think right now it's not quite at the forefront, but at we have, I think, there's two dangers that are facing humanity. One is the uh, just the we don't know how far technology is going to go, how much of an impact it's going to have on our experience, and I think that's going to be coupled with religion. And I think that because people may not realize it, but a big part of the Trump administration is the Project 2025, and it's highly Christian nationalist, and they're really pushing for a theocracy. That's really
yeah,
what they're going for, and that we just haven't really seen it. As we're seeing all these other horrible things, all horrible, horrific things happening right now, but they haven't really pushed that yet. But they will. And so, to me, I think that, to answer your question, I think I'm more afraid of old ideas.
yeah,
So, and technology, I think we can kind of work with. I'm less afraid of the dangers of AI than I am of the mind control of religion. I find that that is far more dangerous than technology.
yeah. Derek, I really am glad you're part of our Joyce group. You're really articulate and concise, and you know how to talk this stuff out in grounded terms, like not too academic-y, and you're just you're
I'm
really
definitely not an academic.
but you're really down to earth. But Joyce, and you Oscar Wilde and Shakespeare, and you know the big picture, in other words. But can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
Ooh, that's a hard one. Um, that's a hard thing. That's something I've explored in my books too, is memory, because it's so hard to know what we experience as an actual memory or something that someone else told us,
Yeah,
or it's just our imagination too. It's such a
yeah,
hard thing to say. There are definitely things that I remember as a kid that were experiences that were definitely memories. So the first one I can think of, um, I don't know. I'm being taken back to Venice, actually. So I grew up in Venice in the late '70s, early '80s mostly, and so I loved it there. I had a really great experience there. I lived off of Rose, and there was like that bread factory, Pioneer something.
yeah. Pioneer Bakery. Wow.
Yeah, I was right around there. I remember I have a lot of memory. Just as I'm talking right now, I have a lot of memories coming up right now of when I was there, jumping from rooftop to rooftop with my friends, or this girl who was like 3 years older than me, flashing her boobies at me when I was a little
Now that's a good memory.
kid.
I would say that's the best early memory I've ever heard. Not your mom, but a girl 3 years older. So is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's more of a blessing.
Yeah,
I think that I think even because I think even when we have memories that are really painful and traumatic, I think that and they do have like a really negative consequences on our present, and we're carrying around this trauma with us from day to day. That can definitely seem like a curse for sure, absolutely. But I think that through the process of investigating our memories, we can heal from those traumas. I don't think that. So I think memory allows us that ability to do it. Whereas if we were to not have memory, we have experiences and then we having reactions to them. I don't think that they would disappear. We may not remember them, but
yeah.
they would have an impact. At least I think definitely like even on our bodies, our physical bodies would react to experiences. So in terms of our brain, our memories, we may not. I mean, if they're not there, our bodies are still reacting to experience. So I think that it's much better to have memories. I think it's a blessing because we can
Yeah.
really use it as a tool to help us grow.
It's muscle memory. You covered a lot there. That was good. Tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
I would say my biological father, and he had an impact on me. He was really like on a personal level, a really big. He was an agnostic as well, and I wasn't always an agnostic. I was a period where I was 3 years where I was a Christian. I was hardcore into it. I had belief. I had faith. But his consistent approach to agnosticism, I think that in combination with on a more creative level and less on a personal level, was Robert Anton Wilson, and his agnosticism was enormously influential on me. But on a personal level, was my father, because his approach to it was like the embrace of possibilities, and that was really really big on my way of looking at life. And because he'd always, like, as things were going on, as say I'm in a relationship and there's a romantic heartbreak and there's a breakup, right? I'm going through a relationship. Um, we would talk and we would have discussions about the experience and just look at all the different angles. So it really helped me to just look at life in the different ways, being open to possibilities. And
That's
that's
beautiful.
been it's really a lot of ways is kind of like the core of who I am on a personal level, and also on a creative level, and also in how I think, and in terms of my philosophy of love chaos, which is built on agnosticism. He was enormously influential.
But that was, you anticipate, you got ESP. The next question was someone outside your immediate family who had an impact on you. I mean, what is the main thing you learned from Robert Anton Wilson, or is there someone else you want to mention?
Well, no, Robert Anton Wilson, I love, and I think he's not given enough credit as just a brilliant writer. Like
Yeah.
his writing is amazing, and I mean,
Oh,
to me, there's a more focus on his his thinking, which is great, and I think he is absolutely brilliant, and and I think there's a lot of influence on like the Eighth Circuit model and other things. So I think that, but I think in terms of what I gained from him, um, and in terms of like he was also a big. I was able to get into the occult, for example. I got into Aleister Crowley because of Robert Anton Wilson. And then from Aleister Crowley, different other areas like chaos magic and Austin Osman Spare, and then like the current magical revival of the 21st century, which came after chaos magic. So those are things that I only got into because of Robert Anton Wilson. Also, too, like I think he because he was into conspiracy theories. There was a time when I was heavily involved in drugs, doing a lot of meth, and so I was in a really paranoid state of mind, and I got super into conspiracy theories, and he really helped me to get out of that, and not in
wow.
the sense of yeah, because not in the sense of like denying conspiracy theories, but he also wouldn't like necessarily embrace it. His attitude was that it's possible, and that you find some truth there, but it also might not be. So either way, again, that's
Yeah.
the embracing of the maybe, right? He was big into the word maybe. I think
Maybe that's Dave Emery would say, well, if it's not a coincidence, then you could call it you could call it a coincidence theory. Oh, there just happens to be three guys with guns standing over there and the bullets came this way. Is it a coincidence rather than conspiracy? I mean, conspiracy theory used to be known as political research. Now,
right.
if you want to kookify anyone's political research, you just go, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory." So it just kookifies because Susie, can you hand me that book right there? Yeah, I wanted to show you this because have you seen this book yet?
No, you mentioned it. I've seen it before. You mentioned it in their James Joyce
Yeah,
group. I had seen it online and it looked
right.
wonderful. I've got to get my hands on it.
Yeah, but anyways, I mean, Robert Anton Wilson was called uh, Groucho Marxist, and he was part of those people who were like, "Hey, we can do this political research, but you don't have to take yourself so seriously that you become, like a movement." I mean, it's good. I like people who do political research. I mean, a guy on Coast to Coast last night, they were hoiking him up because he's written 30 books on the JFK assassination. I mean, that's a lot of work and a lot of 30 books. But I mean, you covered a lot there just going into Robert Anton Wilson because he is like, let's look at both sides of the story and have a sense of humor about this. Don't let it get to you that it, you know, destroys your life or, you
I think I
become
remember him saying that the Illuminati are you and your friends.
well, two things about conspiracy really quick. One is, do you know the word conspiracy and theory was put together by the CIA to debunk political research on Kennedy? So there it is. And I go, well, that could be a conspiracy theory. And my friend, I've had him on podcasts. He says, nope, I can show you the document where the CIA said, let's put these two words together to debunk this stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that a conspiracy theory? Well, no, I mean, there's proof in a paper, but so what? But conspire means to breathe together.
Right.
So that's what we're just taking a breath in together. But again, I love it. I think he's a very important person in the world of McLuhan, James Joyce, all this sense of humor and everything, he just sort of, you know, spawned the whole sense of subgenius, like, let
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
genius let the
Yeah,
geniuses run the world. We'll sort
yeah,
of stand on the side and go,
yeah.
or
I always felt that Plato got it. It was almost there, right? He almost was there, and I think that if he lived maybe a few more thousand years later, he would have gotten the idea that you have a philosopher king, but it's someone like a Robert Anton Wilson
Wilson,
or
yeah,
someone else of like a similar ilk. Like those are the people you want to have in power. Like you don't want
yeah,
those are the philosopher kings that you want to have, right?
yeah. There's a great line that McLuhan says. He goes, "I didn't start the fire. I'm just turning on the alarm." You know, like pay attention. Like
Sure.
all you Finnegans, wake up. So did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No, they did not. So I was not baptized. I was not raised with the religion. My mother and my biological father and my stepfather were all uh, they weren't really atheists. They were more agnostic. But my mom was more open to spirituality, um, and so my mom would want to go to church. So we would go to church and like we started I don't remember going to church while we were here in LA when I was at Venice, but when we moved to Seattle there was a nice church there up on the hill near Queen Anne. We go in Queen Anne at the top of the hill right above the 5 freeway. Beautiful church. And I think that was the beginning of my love of churches. Like I really don't like religion, but I love like the older architecture of that came
Yeah,
from not just only Christianity, but all forms of religion. I really just love it. Just the architecture is just gorgeous. And
it's
so when I went
amazing.
to Europe and went to all these cathedrals, I
Yeah,
fell in love with that kind of like aesthetic experience. And 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 it's possibly a spiritual experience too. But I was definitely not raised with religion. I my first kind of real experience of spirituality was probably as a young kid was into getting into puberty was Joseph Campbell and his
yeah,
Power of Myth with Bill Moyers on PBS. I remember watching
yep.
that on PBS in like the late '80s, early '90s, and that was like his Power of Myth, the Hero of a Thousand Faces, was sort of like my introduction to spirituality, and I absolutely love Joseph Campbell. Really, really great.
He also did 6 hours on Joyce. Besides the 6 hours PBS, he also did 6 hours on Joyce, which you can see too. But Derek, do you pray?
Yes, I do. I have a practice. So I'm agnostic, but I do have an occult practice, I would say. So I've been practicing magic for like about 15 years now. And so I got into it. Again, Robert Anton Wilson was sort of my introduction to the occult, and I got in through him because he loves Aleister Crowley, and he was really into Aleister Crowley, and both him and Timothy Leary, got into Aleister Crowley in the '60s. And Aleister Crowley, again, I think people have to understand, in the '60s there was this magical revival, like the Church of Satan was created in the '60s, in '66, and you had all these like the Wiccan movement was really huge back then, and so you have this thing where people are into ritual and paganism and that sort of experience, and it's continued until this day. There is still, and that's in terms of where my books, most of the people who read my books are into my books. Like even the fiction work, there is an aspect to it that is an occult aspect to it. There's that supernatural aspect to it. It's very much grounded in realism, but the occult is definitely there. And there's Robert Anton Wilson is a huge influence on my writing as well. But yeah, prayer is very important for me. I didn't really, I for a long time, I just thought the occult, ritual, magic, prayer, all those things were just silly and just hocus pocus and just ridiculous. And it wasn't until I started actually doing it myself and seeing the effects of it that it really worked. And then again, and during this whole time, I'm still agnostic, and to this day, I'm still agnostic. So these practices that I do, the rituals and so forth, and and also too, Aleister Crowley was a big agnostic. I think that's what appealed to Robert Anton Wilson, was that, Crowley felt that it's possible that this is a spiritual experience. It's also possible it's all just in our heads. And he says it's fine either way. And so for me, it's fine as well. The tarot is another example of agnosticism, where it could be these are like these cards represent some kind of spiritual reality, and we're communicating with it, or these are just simply just some playing cards that look really nice and have some symbols and intellectual meaning behind it. But either
Yeah.
way, they have their psychological impacts, which are very, very, those are very real for sure.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Um, so, one of the things, William Blake is one of my favorite people, and I know he was basically like a Christian, his own form of Christianity, but he was a Christian. What I really, really loved about him was he created his own mythology, right? And what helped me in 2014 to create Love Chaos was because I was really searching. I was going through a hard time with drug addiction, alcoholism, and all that. It's like I needed something. I'd already had the born again experience with Christianity, so like I didn't really want to do that again. Like I already knew what that was like, and like all these other religions and the 12 steps and just all these things just didn't really appeal to me. So then I like remembered what William Blake said. It was like, instead of being a slave to another man's system, I will create my own. So like, well, why? I'll just create my own system and my own way of thinking. So I created this philosophy of love chaos, which basically is that views the universe or existence as the inherent aspect or the core of life is chaotic in nature, unpredictable. But the important thing is to focus on love within that chaotic experience. So within that, then I go in different angles, the daily life, how do you use that in a daily life? And then how do you do it with psychological tools? And also, if one is interested in the occult, how do you do that in your magical practice? So, for people who are into the magical practices, you know that there's a big part of it is working with entities. And so you work with entities, spirits, or uh, gods, goddesses, demons, whatever it is that you want to, however you want to identify it, right? And from whatever philosophical, religious perspective that one has, But the interaction with entities is very important. So with this mythology, I decided that I would create my own um, mythology that made sense to me, and it helped me enormously to kind of like understand what's going on from my perspective. Like I'm not trying to tell other people to believe this, but to me, God is nothing. So God is beyond any kind of communication. There's no personal aspect to God. It's just nothing. And then underneath that, there's the male chaos and the female as this figure of Babylon. So Babylon is the mother of all. And in terms of how Crowley and others saw Babylon is like the great mother, but also the great prostitute. She doesn't turn anyone down. The only price that she charges is the cost is the loss of your ego. And so I feel there's so much in the universe that's probably, I mean, maybe who knows, it's infinite from our perspective. So it's not to say that we aren't valuable, but there's infinite number of creations in the universe, planets, moons, stars. I mean, everything is just so much there we don't know, that we're just one of infinite number of creations that have been birthed from these chaos of Babylon. So if I were to ask a question, I don't, because of that mythology, I've kind of like said it for me. Again, it's a mythology and I could be wrong. I'm very fine with it being wrong, but that's what makes sense to me on a psychological level. So a question I would ask wouldn't really be to that God entity, nothing, because it doesn't really have a mind. It's nothing. Um, I would say do have like, and for you and for others that know Gnosticism, I'm really into Gnosticism. And so for the Gnostics, there's this one God and there's the God above God, right? So like for a Christian Gnostic, like there's the God of this universe, which is inherently evil. It's like a spiritual dictator. And then there's the God above that, which is the true God. And that's when Christ came to this world, he says, I am not of this world. It's because he's saying he's actually from this other, his father is this other God above this God. So I guess the question I would ask is, this spiritual dictator, is this, which is like an evil force. And so the question what I would ask that evil force, the spiritual dictator that's causing so much harm in the world, is why?
Why? Yeah, that's heavy, because there's a couple things there. You talk about Babylon is the mother of all. It's Mother's Day. Did you know that? That's pretty good. In Auden, the poet said, the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. Because I think you're more into asking questions than giving answers.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think you anticipated the next question, because you go, I don't want to personalize the aspect of God, In fact,
The ultimate aspect, right?
yeah, because this one, they asked Harold Bloom, do you believe in God? And he goes, my attitude towards Yahweh is that I don't like him and I don't trust him and I wish he'd go away. But this is the key line, Derek. But I know he won't, because he's built into the language.
Yes.
As Nietzsche said, he's part of the way we think. As soon as you use a verb involving being, you're in trouble. So that's interesting. My question is, and you answered it in a flip almost, if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Maybe the same question God would ask me, why?
That is brilliant. Because, I also have this question that I rarely ask, but I love it, is, of the five questions that begin with the letter W, why, what, where, when, and who, which is the most important? Most people say why. A couple of my friends go, when. That's all there is. It's like, well, when? But a lot of people say why, and then people say, other, but it is prominent that the why is the one that comes up the most.
It's the search for meaning. I think
Yeah,
that's the
search for meaning.
asking,
Yeah.
the curiosity.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Well, I think there's for me, there's an interaction. So I think that so there, um, so there's these things called egregores, right? So egregores is so when we meet and we go, and at the first Tuesday of the month, we're meeting together from different parts of the world to read and enjoy, discuss, analyze, investigate Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
And through our process of coming together, you have created, and then we have helped you to create this egregore of laugh tears, right? It's basically where we're all kind of like plugged into the same consciousness. We through our collective discussion and what we bring to the table and pleasure, we are creating something that's actually above us. It's like it's a common form of interest. We're all into that, reading Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, and from this perspective, and with the influence of you and on your decades of looking into it, and then your being influenced by Marsh McLuhan. So that's an egregore. And so I feel like that human beings are like, I do like existentialism in terms of that we are responsible. Like we are responsible for actions. I think it's really important, even if we're not, even if we have very little free will. I think it helps us, it benefits us more to have more of a focus on being responsible for our actions.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I
Really
think
good.
that
That's like, I talked to a doctor the other day. Do you take supplements? Oh, yeah. Says that's placebo. He goes, I know. It doesn't matter. But you know, if you get an infection and you take an antibiotic, it'll probably clear it up. But there is still some placebo going on there. Your mind and body can't be separated. So your mind goes, oh my God, I finally got the antibiotic in there and the infection's going to go away. You know, so I see what you're saying. Spell the word egregore,
Sure,
please.
it's EGREGORE.
Great.
And there
And
there was a yeah, there are some books out about it. There is this one guy who is somewhat interesting. He's kind of a right winger, but he's in the occult scene. I forget his name, but he wrote a book called Egregore or Egregores. But yeah, it's like an occult term that basically it's like an entity that's created through human um, collectivism, like a group of people coming together. So I feel like, so for example, like the people causing, to me anyway, the most damage on this earth are these hyper billionaires, and they've collected, and they didn't start it themselves. They just inherited this
yeah,
egregore of this, like this consciousness that the
yeah,
pursuit of greed at no matter the cost. But so I feel, so like, to answer your question though, I think that the human element is ultimately stronger. So I think the responsibility lays on the person. And then I also I want to add to this, is really important, is that I don't think it, in terms of evil people, I think it's more better to look at the behavior. It's not to say it to justify the behavior, or
right.
to let the person like
You
yeah, I
mean
think that it
separate the sin from the sinner.
yeah,
Is that what you're saying? You got to
yeah.
have some element of sin from the sinner. But let's go back to egregore just for a second so I don't forget. We call that, the Finnegan's Wake reading groups are living organisms. It's a living organism. But it's funny because I can't wait to do the etymology on the word, where it came from. It doesn't mean what it's developed into, but you taught me a really important new word. But you covered that well, because really, Derek, you can, not to cut you off, but you can go into it deeper by this extension on that question. It's, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from The Mob and the Samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So again, I'm glad you're laughing. There's a lot of thoughts there, but basically is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Uh, I love Alan Watts. He is a brilliant mind. He did so much to bring Eastern thought and practice over
Yeah.
to the West, and he has, I think, probably my favorite laugh in the entire world. I don't think there's another person who had a better laugh than him.
You know, I
And just
listen to him every Sunday morning on KPFK. You can listen to him at 8 a.m.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love seeing his videos on YouTube, and he
Yeah.
just has a wonderful way of talking and explaining things, and just one of the most brilliant minds, really, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't, just me personally, I don't I don't agree with him there.
Right.
But I mean, uh, so I think that I I'm I love Buddhism, and I love, like, there's aspects of Christianity which I love, but both Buddhism and Christianity are inherent, like, supposed to be very compassionate philosophies. They're supposed to be about turning the other cheek, and not really looking at the evil that others do, or just forgiving it. But I think that it's really important. Again, it's going back to the sin rather than the sinner. I think the behavior still has to be dealt with, and so it's not about whether someone wants to forgive or get revenge. It's more, I think, we, as life organisms, right? Whether we have souls or not, as life organisms, our inherent, like, natural desire is to survive, we are inherently built to live. Like that's how we are. What do we want to call it? Programmed or created or whatever. We are designed to live, and so I think it's inherent in our nature to make sure that we do survive. So if we're threatened in some kind of way, I don't think it's wrong to acknowledge it or to turn the other cheek. I think we have to be very careful. Like if we're being threatened,
Yeah.
we have to deal with it, and maybe it might be easier to deal with in terms of dealing with the behavior, and not necessarily seeing the person as like inherently evil, even if they've done really enormously evil things. I think we can just look at the behavior and make sure we deal with it.
It's really heavy because I wrote an essay called Can Art Stop War? And it's based on the fact that in a lot of ways, Finnegan's Wake is an anti-war manifesto, anti-fascism and anti-war manifesto. But Maria Gimbutas, anthropologist, archaeologist, spawned Rianne Eisler, Chalice and the Blade, that maybe we are more hardwired to cooperate than to have war, to fight, than violence. But you just said it, turning the cheeks is not a good thing, but we're probably hardwired to survive. So, we want to, in our group, we are always pushing this. Well, no, we're more hardwired to cooperate. So that focus on behavior is interesting, because then what do you do about it? And it goes to Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Going to your Joseph Campbell thing. Then my friend said, no, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson says, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So again, it's a lot of prompts. You can go wherever you want, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
That is an interesting question, because like for 6.5 years, I worked, the people I was helping were men coming from prison, and some of them had spent decades locked up and incarcerated. And so most of the people I worked with, had done violent crimes, were gang members and so forth. So it was not only dealing with addiction, but it was dealing with all these other behavioral issues and
Yeah.
stuff. I was part of what was called the Amity Foundation, which was founded by this fantastic woman named Naya Arbiter. She passed away in 2022. But her philosophy was that punishment does not work, and that it was her modality was the teaching and therapeutic community modality, which is very cool. Basically, like the community is the therapist, and it really ties into the real, positivist, progressive notions of anarchism, of Noam Chomsky, and so forth. That like what you were talking about earlier, is that human beings are really like more hardwired to cooperate. And I believe that. I really do. I really feel that we're more actually designed to get along, because going back to survival, like our ancestors had to cooperate with each other to survive. Of course, there was tribes that were threats to each other, and so they had to have conflicts between them, I suppose. But I think that punishment, as much as I love Naya, and she was just fantastic person in her philosophy, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that it's better to educate. I think educate is a better way to deal with um, behaviors that are not working.
Yeah.
But there is the reality too, which I see, and I live here in LA, and I take public transportation, and so I'm on the streets, and just a lot of people who are, really need that therapy and support and love and care, but there also may not be in the mental state to really receive that. So in order to avoid innocent people from being harmed from their behavior, they may need to be removed. Is that a form of punishment? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but I have seen, I mean, like some forms of punishment do work. I don't think it should be seen as this inherently ineffective. It can work, but I don't think it can work on its own. I think you have to educate people. That's the more important aspect.
Really well done. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Because there's just too much going on. I think life is just overwhelming sensory experience. We can't catch everything. You know, there's no way for us to be able to see things. I think that's what there's on one hand there's that. There's too much going on and we just don't notice it. So art is a way to show people what's going on. On another level, besides just showing them the reality of reality, is also to show like heightened reality. And I think this is where great works of art come in, is that they're not just. I do love realism. I love naturalism very much so. But even in say like the most realistic works, like let's say Anton Chekhov, there's still a selection going on for him in terms of what characters he's portraying, how he's portraying them, and even though he's portraying them in hyper realistic ways, naturalistic ways, and it's gorgeous, but there is this choice. There's a selection of how he's choosing lines of dialogue and certain characters and certain relationships, and it's an insight. It's an insight into life. So the artist is able to provide that insight and communicate it to the audience or reader in ways where the you know the reader or the audience would not be able to notice. They wouldn't just they just they're the artist and it's very similar I think into the scientist in that they spend a lot of time in their head. So they're spending a lot of time thinking about life, like thinking. And a lot of people just don't really want to do that. So then the artist or the scientist comes back and tells the people who would rather not spend all that time in their head, hey, look at life in this way. Like, oh, okay. I never noticed that. And that's, or maybe it could be enormously shocking. It could be a psychic breakdown. Sometimes great works of art don't have to be nice. It can be really psychically violent, you know, like works like Clockwork Orange or the works of John Cassavetes or just any number of great artists who make you really uncomfortable. But that should be part of the experience, like is showing that aspect, you know.
It's really good. Two of my favorites you brought up there. Amazing, Kubrick and Cassavetes. So walk us through, Derek, your tipping point. You're growing up a reader. Where did you get this deep dive into Chekhov, Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, Joyce? Is this in high school from your assignments or on your own? And it's basically, where's that tipping point where you're reading and then go, oh, I can do this. This is my calling in life.
I think it started early on, as a child, as an only kid, and I never called my biological father or dad. I never called my stepfather father or dad. I called my mother, but there was this conflict in terms of who was my real father. So I was kind of in this place between the three of them and different families, and we moved a lot. And I go from environment to environment. So I think that the one place that I had solace in was myself. So it was in my own head, or it was in drawing. I first started out drawing, so it was like an outlet to my experience, how I was experiencing life. And isolation was like drawing, comic books, then from comic books reading Stephen King novels, and then from Stephen King, I think the first kind of like my experience in terms of like movies, and I think this predated my this definitely it predated my entry into Shakespeare and Homer and James Joyce, was actually seeing the Terry Gilliam film The Fisher King. So that was like the first time where I saw a movie, and it made me, I think I was like 11 or 12, just kind of like really kind of like think. And I was like watching a film. It wasn't like a genre movie. It wasn't like an action movie. It wasn't a comedy. It wasn't like a fantasy film. It was like a conglomeration of all this stuff. And it wasn't easy to explain. And it was like, and I love, part of why I liked it so much was I was a kid. I really loved Robin Williams a lot. Robin Williams was a hero of mine. And not only in the movies he was in, but I used to love watching his stand up too. And so I think it was like that to me was the entry point was Gilliam's for the Fisher King, and like the element of fantasy, which I liked before, but then there's this reality of like, of the I think it was Jeff Bridges was the main character, but his sort of his difficulties, his breakup, he lost his position as a disc jockey because of a traumatic experience, I think, and then his relationship to this homeless guy, the Robin Williams character, and this fantasy world, this Don Quixote kind of thing going on. So that was like, oh, okay. So like movies and books and art can kind of like show me this thing, this reality, you know. Um, and then I started writing stories in middle school, and then I got into this really great school in Seattle called Nova, and it was built, it was created in the '60s, and it was public school, so the kids didn't have to pay for it, and the teachers all went by their first name. There was no desks, there was just couches, and the classes were really small. There was only 130 students in the high school. It was a really small school. We used half of a building. The other half was used by administration, the Seattle public school system, and it was run and by democratic committees. So everything was decided by committee, and students had the same voice as the staff. So they would put things to vote, and you'd vote on whatever, right? There was no grades. There was no. It was just this amazing. You pass or fail, but you have to write an essay on what you intended to learn. The teacher wrote an essay explaining this is what I expect you to learn, and then by the end of the semester, if you did it, you passed. If you didn't, you failed. There's all these amazing classes. I had a really amazing teacher, a literature teacher, who had these two pool tables. So I got into playing pool, and he was just a lot of fun. And he made Shakespeare exciting. It was absolutely amazing. I was just like because what he did, and I met Al Pacino through my job last year, and Al Pacino, I think, hit the nose on the head in terms of Shakespeare, is that before you say any lines at all, before you hear any of the dialogue or anything, explain the story first to an audience that doesn't know the story, right? So my teacher would be like, okay, you guys, this is what's going on here. And he would get into it. So we knew what was going on. Like, oh, okay, now this person doesn't like that person, this person loves that person, and so forth. And then you hear the language, and then he'd say, if you don't understand everything, don't worry. Like just enjoy the words, enjoy the words unto themselves and how they express things and how they make you feel. And then we can look at the meaning later. But as long as you know the story, enjoy the language, then you can get into the meaning. Don't try to get into the meaning before everything else. The meaning will come last. And then just to finish up with my answer, uh, so how I got into Joyce was that I was writing these short stories, and my other English teacher, she had an assistant who was a young college woman who was her assistant, and so she would come and meet with me as a creative writing assistant, and she's I like your writing, Derek, but you need to work on your characters. They're not well developed. You need to put more attention to detail. So let me show you an example. So she showed me an example from Ulysses. And so I think it was one of the female characters in Ulysses. I forget which one. But she's like, see, and then she made a remark like, well, Joyce, he didn't necessarily like respect women's intelligence, but he had he had a really great way of getting into this character's head, and so you really felt that she was vivid, and so um, so I'll be honest, like I had a crush on her. So she was older, she's like 21, 22, and I'm like 14. And so because I was really attracted to her introducing Joyce to me, and then and the way of and how it could help my own writing, that was how I got hooked on to Joyce, was through her. She introduced me to Joyce, and then I got really intrigued with this guy. Like, who is this guy? Then I started reading his biography, and I started reading his short stories, Dubliners, and I'm like, wow, I fell. So I fell in love with Shakespeare and Joyce around the same time, my first year of high school. But it was that environment at Nova, that it was an amazing educational environment, that made the difference.
How do you spell that, Derek? Nova?
Yeah,
Nova. Yeah.
Nova. It's all capital letters. It's
Yeah,
not an
it
acronym.
sounds
Yeah,
like
it's a,
Summerhill. You know, all those.
that's it.
It's
So
it's Summerhill.
it was
Yeah,
built on the Summerhill model. Yep.
yeah. Also, you really nailed what T.S. Eliot said. Poetry can communicate before it's understood. But you're saying that Pacino said, "Oh, have someone tell you this the basics of the story before the play starts, or
Yeah.
tell before the play starts.
Yeah.
Know a little what's going on." Because that's like
Yeah.
when people go, "What's Finnegan's Wake about?" It's like it's about everything that ever happened and will happen.
Well, I think those are, well, see, like, so like Shakespeare's sonnets, like the poet, like the sonnets in particular, are closer to me to Finnegan's Wake. You don't necessarily need to know what's going on
Right.
prior to enjoying Shakespeare's sonnets, but the
Right.
plays are like, they do have a story,
Yeah.
and I do feel like that's sort of like,
Yeah.
that's really important to know. Especially for someone who doesn't know Shakespeare. Now, if you have been if you've been enjoying Shakespeare for a little while, know some of the
Yeah.
plays, I think it's okay to not have it explained to you.
Yeah.
Just you figure it out on your own with a group of people.
Yeah.
But for a newbie, for a virgin to Shakespeare, I think it does help a lot to have it kind of
Yeah.
explained beforehand.
Then did you go to college and take creative writing and literature?
Well, so what ended up happening was and not too long after this experience with literature, with Shakespeare and Joyce and creative writing,
That's
I
all in
did
high school.
is all in high school. This is all
Yeah.
happening in high school in Seattle. I then had a film class. So like the very next semester, like this is all happening my freshman year of high school. I had a film class taught by this college guy who had just graduated from Bard University in New York, and he taught the cinema class, and I fell in love with cinema. So I changed from being a writer of fiction, of writing stories, to wanting to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And so from the age of 14 till when I wrote tons of scripts, I made a number of short films, and I finally made a feature film in my 20s. And I wanted to do it at the same age as Orson Welles. He did it at the age of 26. So I was like, I have to finish my first feature by the age of 26. So I did. It was very Cassavetes. It was very heavily influenced by Cassavetes and Lars von Trier. So this is 2000, early 2000s, and very emphasis on the actors and improvisation, like Mike Lee, lots of improvisation. And I released it. So I was so burnt out on filmmaking that that whole experience, and I went to film school. I dropped out of film school, went to a couple of film schools and stuff. Um, but I was just so burnt out on the experience of filmmaking that I switched back to writing stories, writing literature, and started writing short stories again. And then I got back into that and have been into that ever since then. So for like the last 20 something years, I've been doing it. Yeah.
Right. 20 years. That's really good. Because that's funny. Because I have this whole theory. Because I always say 27, but it's Wells released Kane when he was 27. But the thing is, you say is you create your masterpiece at 27. I have this whole 27 theory. That's the opposite of all the greats dying at 27. That I've found this pattern of everybody who created something at 27. Like McLuhan invented media ecology, Aretha saying, blah, blah, blah. It's an amazing pattern. But you said 26, 27. That's an amazing time where you create your masterpiece, because you meet these kids now at 20, And I like, dude, you got 6 years to create your masterpiece.
Right.
You know, but it doesn't mean you don't pursue it your whole life, and you don't have to create a masterpiece. But that was amazing. So let's go into this in your writing, writing all these books, 16 fiction books. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process writing these 16 fiction books?
Well, I definitely feel like for me, I can speak very much so that there there has to be like a reason for why I'm writing the book. So there is like the intention is there is an intention. So like for example, one of my first novels was this book called I, which was my I love Dostoevsky as well, and I'm not a Christian, so I was like my intention behind it was to switch the mess or the vision, Dostoevsky's vision of this guy who commits a murder and has redemption afterwards and his paranoia and all that. So I wanted to write a story from on the opposite end to flip it like an inverse. My intention was to inverse his vision, Dostoevsky's vision. Um, it was very autobiographical. So basically, asked myself, what if I were to commit a murder? So I flipped it instead of the lead character like Raskolnikov in The Crime and Punishment, instead of killing an old lady that's innocent, and this version is a person who kills a couple in self-defense in drug use. There was like a drug deal, and so it's something that I wanted to flip it in terms of, does one turn one's soul over to authority? Because ultimately, then of Crime and Punishment, he gives himself up. And so this version is the intention was clearly from the get go. I wanted to show a story where a person, their salvation was not in submission. It was actually in the opposite, and in defiance. And so, um, and the defiant of the individual, the value of the individual. So the intention was clear, and I would have to say that for the most part, my intention from the beginning is clear, but it changes, and I go through massive changes along the way. So, for example, that first book I wrote, it took me 12 years to write, and it went through. It actually first started out as a screenplay, and then it changed and changed. I rewrote it. I changed the style of it enormously by the end, and so my creative process is in constant change, but I have to kind of go in with some kind of intention, even if the intention itself changes along the way. I have to have like a reason for why I'm doing this project. I really, because it's such a commitment to commit to a project, and especially if you commit to it over a period of years. As most of my projects, they take a long time to develop. If I'm going to commit that time to it, I have to really like, okay, why am I writing this? Why am I doing it?
Well, Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your book?
I definitely, I don't, I, I want to engage the reader. I want to entertain. I'm very much interested in creating a story that's entertaining. Um, I don't think about who could be the possible reader. To me, it's more about like, well, this is my idea of what something is entertaining or engaging, and thought provoking. This is my idea, and I have to commit to what is going to make me happy with this story. I can't, you know, uh, be too concerned about how other people are going to respond. I would say I have one of the privileges that I've had as being basically like an outsider writer, being like basically a pretty obscure author all these years. I mean, I do sell books and I do get on podcasts and talk about my books over the years, and there's I guess an audience. I don't know what kind of audience it is. It's very hard to define or explain, but it's one of the privileges that I have of being obscure is that I don't have to meet expectations. So one of the downfalls of success is that when you do create something that's successful, it's not only from the pressure of others in terms of what are you going to do next, but also on yourself in terms of like, well, what am I going to do to follow that? Like, and how am I, and that's one of the challenges I think of a successful, popular artist of any kind is like, well, what do you do next? So for me, I've had enormous freedom to just basically do what I want. And I like it that way. I love having that freedom of really having no expectations, no pressure, and just being able to create works exactly how I want to.
Yeah. Really good, Derek. I asked for 90 minutes, so we're already there, but I'd love to plan a part 2 down the line to really get in deeper a lot to Joyce, literature, art and science, all these different topics, the occult, your love, chaos, philosophy, and just philosophy in general. Your delve into philosophy, because we really didn't say, oh, I studied philosophy, but how could you create a philosophy without no? So let's close this part 1 out with this last question. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera or projector might extend our eyelid, and maybe even like non-tangible, say religion or philosophy, might extend consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a pen or a keyboard, what humanness does the writing utensil extend?
I think it extends the possibilities of what it is to be human. I think for me, I think that this is how I feel in terms of where we can explore aspects of whether it be the occult or the supernatural or anything that seems to be about something beyond the human. I feel that it doesn't mean it has to be. It takes us away from the human, and we are sublimating the human for the supernatural thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's a way to explore what we are and what's going on in us because I feel like just here in our heads there is an infinite number of things going on that we're never going to stop being able to just sort of like find and explore and see. So I feel like that the writing thing is an extension of the human in terms of like I think more so than the fork or the knife that extends the mouth or the camera extending the vision, our eyes, or even religion in terms of expanding our understanding of consciousness, which it does for sure. I think I think that in terms of the creative process, because it is so built on intangibles and in aspects that are in motion, constantly moving and constantly in flux. I think it's more about possibilities of different directions and different avenues of seeing things. So I think it opens us up in terms of the human, in terms of what human means, rather than just like staying with like a specific um, category.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. That's amazing. It's forever expanding in again, back to your thing, it's like opens us up to new questions as opposed to here's the answers.
Right.
So it's really been fun, Derek. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your input at the Finnegan's Wake group. um,
I
I'm
love
gonna
it.
hit.
That's great.
Yeah, I really learned a lot, and I appreciate your time and energy and all that you taught me today. And
Thank you.
even though I'm gonna hit the end broadcast button now, I hope this never ends and we keep talking forever and ever.
Yes.
Thank thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
Okay, we'll
Much
be in
appreciate you,
touch.
Gary. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll talk about part 2 soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.